omni-channel, getting that omni-channel touch points really came to life this week.
I mean, this is a good way to kind of kick us off too, but I was thinking about it, the difference between last Super Bowl and this Super Bowl, and how, you know, first of all, it was super validating. Super Bowl of last year was very validating for all of us. But now the way the landscape has changed and the level of buy-in and the insights that our partners are seeing, it's like last year it was the nameless Coinbase QR ad, and this year it was, it was a crowd pleaser for sure. But this year, it was the NFL using Flowcodes in their own commercials, which is like, if we're going to go from one end to the other, it's like, talk about a wild year for Flowcode. And just the buzz at our office has been crazy. So just really excited to get to talk about it. So for everybody who is with us today, thank you so much for joining. We are also recording, so those of you who are joining us, basically from the future, hey, how are you? Just by way of introduction, we're just hopping in. We'll talk a little bit about ourselves here in a minute, but you are joining us for the Flowcode webinar, taking O2O to the end zone. This is essentially our Super Bowl post-game review, and we want to talk about everything, the good, bad, and the ugly. We all saw a ton of QR and a lot of varied experiences in the big game on Sunday. Here's kind of a rundown of what we're going to talk about. Who the heck is Flowcode, and why should you know us? We'll talk a little bit about kind of where the history of QR on TV comes from and how it's changed over the course of this year. We'll talk about the landscape, the data landscape, or lack thereof, I suppose, in TV and sports that kind of gave rise to the necessity of QR on TV. We'll do a little bit of a deep dive on some of the more high profile QR activations from the Super Bowl this year. And then we will run into some of our own best practices and case studies, touching not only on the Super Bowl activations that we did, but some other really awesome ones from TV and sports and all of these other areas in the Flowcode ecosystem, so everybody can see kind of what best practices look like. And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A at the end. Just by way of introduction, my name is Megan. I'm the head of media sales here at Flowcode. I work with publishers and agencies and networks and everybody to basically put codes in content, primarily focusing on TV these days. And I am joined by my very esteemed colleague, Zach Rogo, head of sports and entertainment partnerships. How are you, Zach?
I'm doing great, Megan. Thanks for including me on this. Excited to talk through everything that's been happening the last couple of weeks. It's been crazy.
Absolutely. Zach, can you just tell our listeners, our dear listeners, who some of the partners are that you work with on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I typically work with the leagues, teams, and kind of ancillary entities around sports and entertainment. So basically anyone who comes in contact with the fan is looking to create those kind of unique one-to-one connections with the fan. What better way to do that than with Flowcode? So a lot of those partners work with me on a day-to-day basis and finding out, how do we connect with the fan? How do we make the fan experience better? How do we capitalize off of some of the data and all around create that kind of 360-degree view? So no day is kind of the same. A lot of fun things to go to, a lot of events and whatnot, especially this time of the year. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind, and the success we've had across media and sports to date has been really, really great, and excited to talk about it today.
Absolutely. And I love that we overlap so much, right? So really the thing about Flowcode, and we're not going to do a whole deep dive into the platform, but everybody is aware of us from the code standpoint, right? Everybody says, oh, we see your codes everywhere. And that's very true. Zach and I work with partners who are essentially putting codes in all kinds of content. And what does everybody turn to every day? News, weather, and sports. There are codes in all of that, basically in every market in the United States, across broadcast and streaming and every type of content access that you can find. There's a code there. We are a platform that really focuses very heavily on the post-scan experience and data. So the code itself is really just the front door. We have our post-scan experience called Flow Page, which is very experiential, great for driving conversions and immediate measurement. And then you have our beautiful data and analytics platform that really gives you real-time one-to-one insights with real human beings. As we know, you cannot accidentally scan a flow code. Every time we see one of these scans, we know that's a person who is expressing enough interest to not only see the message, but then sit forward and choose to respond to it. So whether it's on TV, watching a sports game at home, or, you know, doing something like that, or in stadium, working with one of Zach's partners, you know, essentially we are changing the way brands and publishers are engaging with the average consumer. Just some logo soup here. You can see who we work with. I'm not gonna hang on this too much, but essentially this is just to say that our team is really, really specialized when it comes to sports and media. So you look at Zach and I, and this is kind of exactly where we spend all of our time, really analyzing the results and working with these partners to learn all about how to be connected across all of these spaces. Now, the evolution of our company, people talk all the time about, you know, QR getting its big kickoff in the pandemic. That is all very true. But my favorite thing about Flowcode is that we actually got our start ahead of the pandemic. Talk about, I mean, Zach, TA, long history of seeing around corners. I mean, President of the Americas at Google essentially built the Google advertising platform. You know, AOL, Yahoo, Verizon, storied media personality, obviously, goes to China and sees the QR economy in China, the direct-to-consumer economy in China, and says, you know what, QR is my new thing. 2019, everybody told him he was crazy.
That's right.
But then the pandemic happened. And, you know, we look at the kind of evolution specifically of QR on TV. If we're going to like think about the Super Bowl, it's the biggest TV stage that there is. And, you know, the thing is that it's not new. You know, even the Coinbase commercial, which everybody touted as being like a first time thing, we all have been working with partners at Flowcode on Flowcode TV since 2019, and you can see what some of these activations have looked like. And so like where we started was, hey, how do we explain to users that they can interact with their TV screens, whether it's, you know, voting in a poll on a basketball game or purchasing a product off of a TV commercial. In 2019, we were already working with partners to figure out how to tap into that. 2020 came around, and obviously the ubiquity with QR, it kind of led to an increase of people actively scanning, whether that was in TV or in any other experience. You can put a flow code on anything, and everybody did. And then in 2021, 2022, we really spent all of our time quietly building the most robust analytics platform that speaks not only to that TV publisher, that media publisher need, but also answering that question for those sports leagues and for anybody else who's really trying to understand who their audience is. Zach, what is the stat? There's a stat that's like, what is the percentage of data that they actually know about somebody when they show up in stadium? Like, what is the gap there?
The rough feedback thus far has been about 25%. And most of that in stadium is the season ticket holders. So they know who those folks are. They don't know who they're bringing to the games. They don't know if they sell their tickets on a third-party website. I'm sure everyone has heard about Ticketmaster and what's going on there with everything that they capture.
Not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Exactly. So yeah, a lot of the feedback we've gotten in market is how can we learn more about our fans to enhance their experience, enhance our data and analytics in the back end. And once again, you know, due to a lot of the things that you talked about, the ubiquity, folks seeing the codes, knowing what to do, this is by far and away the easiest way to, as a catalyst for those connections.
Yeah. And I think that's really fascinating. You know, we talk about this overlap between like the sports and entertainment and the media side, and kind of that audience learning is really, that's the big gap in both of those categories, is really like, we know people show up and we have these general assumptions about them, but like, how do we dial that down even further? And that's kind of like where we come in, right? Is like, Flowcode goes in everything. It is the most elegantly simple solution. And when we think about all of the things that you can use Flowcode for, like we can talk about shoppable TV all day long, but if you apply the same principles to that in-stadium element, it's an end-to-end solution, which we saw because the Super Bowl, obviously, codes on screens for the viewers at home, there were codes in the stadium, codes in the programs, all of that. And so what ended up actually happening is this full data picture end to end. And that satisfies the needs of both the publishing side, the brand side, everybody who's spending $7 million for a 30 in the Super Bowl. Like suddenly there are metrics for that. And then the NFL too is coming back and saying, well, now we know everything about who's in stadium, but also who's watching at home. And so this mosaic of metrics, it's really never existed before, but it's kind of changing the game, right? And like
Exactly. And I think a lot of that too also is for folks who maybe can't get out to the game or can't get to the stadium and whatnot. How do you bring an experience into their living room where they feel like they're at the game? And, using the dynamic DNA of our platform, it's super easy to do that, to be able to add where codes go to, change where they go to in real time as things may happen on the field, on the court, on the ice, whatever it is. We provide a really interesting way to now engage with fans like never before.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's like just like so fun about it too is that there's the easy and kind of very transactional things that we're all really familiar with, right? Like things like we saw in the Super Bowl, scan to claim, scan to buy, scan to get the Chiefs winning memorabilia, whatever that was. But then, we've seen other activations that are really like more on the experiential side. I'm thinking about football. I'm not a sports person, Zach. I don't know if you know this about me. Sports ball. Anyway, but one of the things that I had seen that one of our partners is actually doing in the sports space, sports and TV, because they are a broadcast partner who broadcasts sports, using codes to actually launch AR experiences where your favorite player is standing in your living room. And it's that idea of like, it could be as simple as scan to purchase or scan to see a website, or as complicated as building that brand experience right out in front of it. And I love that you just said that. It's like the experience of being in stadium is incredible. How do you replicate that using this platform at home? And it's amazing that you see that happening both from the league side and from the publisher side. It's like everybody is catering to that need from the consumer. We love
Exactly.
our partners. Our partners are really smart. I'm telling you. And the thing about it too, and like we'll touch on this a little bit, is like, yes, the things like data insights and CRM capture and all of these things are obviously the kind of instant gratification portion of the platform. We now know the results of the Planters Peanuts ad, right? And we'll talk about that. But there's a lot of other things that are kind of untapped if we're looking at this from a business to business perspective, whether you're a publisher, an agency, if you're a brand, whatever that is. There's a lot of ways to be able to monetize these experiences, a lot of ways to use this data for business purposes to make yourself more money. And so we'll kind of touch on those as we go, especially as we talk through some of these best practices. But like, let's get to the meat of what we're talking about. The post-game report, one of the biggest things, and Zach, I don't know, did everybody blow your phone up too on Super Bowl? Like, oh my gosh, look at all these QRs, or is that one a Flowcode? Is that one a Flowcode? I don't know about you, but my phone was going crazy all night.
100%. Yeah, it was all over the place because this year, so many more than last year, right? Last year had the one that we're seeing bouncing around the screen. Here, the Coinbase ad. This year there was just a plethora of codes everywhere. So everyone was like, oh, is that one yours? Is that one yours? Which one are you doing? Some were better than others, that's for sure. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that. But yeah, it was great to see just the amount, I think it was 20x or 25x of last year, the amount of codes on the commercials this year.
It definitely, and the reason that I start with the Coinbase one is because like the percent increase in connected experiences year over year is so exciting, especially for us in our industry. But we know that there are very significant differences between QR and Flowcode. And so like, we see kind of this prolific example of QR and the pros, it's all the same kind of, it's the benefit of interactivity, right? So if you look at a QR like a scan and you put if you look at a scan like a click and you put it in context of TV, and especially in context of the Super Bowl, you essentially got 25 million clicks on your message within 30 seconds, right? And there were a lot of really amazing things about that, especially because it hadn't been done at that scale yet. So that is the biggest pro, and the biggest thing to take away from this is that this accomplished what it needed to accomplish from that standpoint. But the other side of that is it got a lot of pushback. There were a lot of people who said it was like not compelling creative. You know, a lot of people said like, well, where's the rest of it? The
Mhm.
FBI came out afterward and said, don't scan codes if you don't know where they're going to. That's a cybersecurity risk. There were people who said that they couldn't scan it, that they didn't like the post-scan experience. There were a lot of people that the post-scan experience didn't even work, right? So like, this was kind of the stage that was set for us last year. And we were so excited about it because it validated the work we had been doing up until this point, but it gave us a lot to work with in terms of how do we level this up. And so we'll talk again, we'll touch on some of these Flowcode platforms, activations, but like knowing that that's where the stage was set, we all had a lot of very high expectations for QR going into the Super Bowl. Like, Zach, the week leading up to the Super Bowl was like one of the most impressive, I think, from an engineering standpoint, like watching our team prep to be ready to take traffic like this, but then also our PR team, our CS team, everybody who was basically all hands, like, we know that there's going to be QR. We know there's going to be flow codes. Let's make sure that this is a positive experience for everybody. And let's improve on the experience from last year, which I think we're biased, but the Flowcode experience was 100% exactly what we wanted it to be. But as people who work in the space, I had feelings about the other QRs. I had feelings about them.
I think that's a great segue to this slide that you have here, actually. And in going back to our engineering team and what they put together in the week leading up, from a load testing perspective, and to see that our preparation was for this exact moment that happened on the very first ad featuring a QR code. It validated everything I know for them and as well as us, because I think we all saw what happened here. If you had a chance to scan this one, just what kind of that experience was like. And this was not a flow code, full disclaimer.
Not a Flowcode.
But yeah, that's exactly why we do what we do, right? It's to protect against things like this, to provide that entire full scope of services, safety, security, load testing, and making sure at the end of the day, first and foremost, our products need to work. And that's exactly what we saw kind of not happen here with this ad.
Yeah. And so the feelings that I have, I'm kind of like on two sides of the fence, right? Because my heart is happy to see a prominently featured code with a prominent call to action. Obviously it's a win to have this on screen anyway, but my heart breaks for the negative consumer experience. And the other part of this that really, the thing that I would say is, when the initial scan, I believe, was to go and collect, I think it was up to 4,000 NFTs. It was like the first 4,000 scanners were able to collect this NFT. And then the remainder of those scanners were driven through to Twitter. Now, when you drive traffic to a non-O&O property, let's say it's a social media page, let's say it's Amazon, let's say it's something else, you always kind of lose control of a little bit of that result, right? Because that's not your website. You can't, it's not easy to do things like load testing on a website you don't own. And so like where I see room for taking this to the next level is perhaps utilizing something like a flow page or some other more kind of curated experience that not only can be load tested the way we were able to do with our codes leading up to the Super Bowl, where you have a partner who's able to say, like, we can handle this much traffic, here's a contingency plan, but also that you're going to maximize those results and own that data. Because ultimately, even if those scans had all worked exactly the way they wanted them to, Twitter owned that data. Twitter saw that traffic. The brand itself did not. So that's kind of one of the things. You get all of those questions sometimes of like, well, should I have something scanned through to my Facebook? Can I have it scanned through to social? Absolutely, you can. But if data and owning that data is part of your narrative, it's always better to scan through to something that you actually can control. So lots of things to say about this one that were positive, but also kind of missing the mark in a lot of places too that were pretty important.
Absolutely.
This one, Zach, this one, very exciting from the standpoint, again, prominent code placement, really interesting call to action. And I loved this because from a TV and like content consumption standpoint, you're driving visibility from one piece of content to another. You're creating that buzz of saying, access content, access additional content on this other platform, and you get to track the behavior from like this person scanned the Super Bowl commercial, and then they also accessed this content on Netflix. Only works if the code works.
That's what it comes down to.
It really does. But this was another one of those things. And like, you know, I mean, Zach, I can't imagine that anybody has more stringent requirements for, you know, I like technical capabilities and integrations and data safety and all of these things as like the NFL, the NHL, the NBA. And we obviously see that so much on the brand side too. It definitely is one of those things that like it speaks to the level of attention to detail that our team pays to things like this. You know, you mentioned it on the first slide of you know, having a partner to help you work through those technical integrations to make sure it goes off without a hook. But, you know, I mean, I see it with my partners. I can't even imagine the level of sophistication that your partners have and the way that they vet to make sure that everything goes off without a hook. I mean, we'll talk about the NFL code, but like, what was it like? And this is actually, I guess, a good segue into like, we saw the previous ones, the not so great QR activations, right? So like we see owning your own data obviously is a huge thing. Prominent code placement, good creative, solid call to action. We all love those things. It brings us to some of the Flowcode activations. We'll talk about planters. Obviously, this was like our like in Super Bowl ad, and the NFL as well. But like, can we talk about kind of what some of that process was like with the NFL and like how do they vet us? How do you work with them? And like, what are the questions that they ask about the data and the code and all of that? Like, what level of due diligence have they done with us so far?
Yeah, super sophisticated partner, as you can imagine, especially when it's pertaining to the largest stage, the biggest game of the year. Got to make sure we're all buttoned up, and a lot of preparation goes into that. I will say we have our managed service team, and they are absolute crushers. So they work hand in hand with all of our clients and make sure they have exactly what they need, build out the campaigns, triple, quadruple check everything to make sure that we're good to go. On top of that, we also have the Eng team on the load testing side. So basically, we're buttoned up on every single touch point that we can be before it gets to the consumer. So once the consumer has the opportunity to scan, they're ready to go, and we're funneling the data in real time to where it needs to go. So there's a ton that goes into it. A lot of it, again, is working hand in hand with our partners. And I think that's where our client success team plays such a huge role. They're absolutely awesome. And, you know, that just doesn't really exist in the QR space, if you will,
Right.
where you have real humans here to help you that know what works, know what doesn't work, best practices, things like that. Like you can see the size of the call to action on this ad. That's not by accident, right?
And
Like
code persistence. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, even things like that, right? Is like one of the most unsung benefits of working with our team is the level of specialization. It's not only being able to speak the QR language, but your team working directly with the leagues and knowing exactly what's important to them. Our team working with media production, knowing everything there is to know about commercial placement and audience visibility or viewership and all of these things. And like we have incredible partners like our friends at VaynerMedia who really embrace those best practices. And like, that's really where you see the difference in performance. So when you have the teamwork, when you have the best practices and you're vetting everything about the platform, it's a very different experience with Flowcode versus QR. And you can see that evidenced in these two cases and then the data that we see here. So like, one of the most incredible things about this too, and we talk about it all the time, is that scan is a super strong signal of intent. That leads to universally high conversion rates, right? And when we talk about earning audience data, right? So like, that's the thing, is like, you could put a code up and, you know, the audience doesn't necessarily know what they're getting unless you tell them, and they don't know if they're sharing their data, or they like what it's being used for and all of that. And like, the whole concept of really working with Flowcode and leaning into these best practices is earning that engagement from your audience. And what we saw was, because the content was so solid, the code was persistent, the call to action was so strong, not only did we see a 67% conversion rate, obviously the conversion goal here was watching the extended form content. We saw a 67% conversion rate, but also 45% of those viewers opted into sharing their pinpoint location. So like, adding that measurement on top of, you know, they get the report that says, hey, this many people watched the Super Bowl. It's now this many people sat forward and engaged with you. 67% of those actually went on to take the action you wanted them to take. And of those, 45% pinpointed where they were on a map for you. And it's like, what incredible insights for a brand to be able to take and run with, right? And then I think about it too, from the standpoint of somebody like the NFL, of being able to see a signature of viewers even in like this late in the game. Like, this was what, Q3, Q4, it was very late. And you know, being able to see that variance in audience engagement across all of these positions, I mean, that's really very incredible too. I'm very curious, I mean, have you heard anything back from your partners at the NFL just about like the commercial aspect of it? Do they ever, like, have they talked to you about like the advertising aspect of the Super Bowl, or like the performance aspect of the Super Bowl?
Yeah, first and foremost, they were very, very impressed with everything that went off. You know, no news is good news on game day for them when everything goes as planned.
Fair enough.
So when we have going back to kind of these omni-channel connections at State Farm Stadium, at the Fan Fest, on television, and everything gets funneled into that one place, it makes it super easy for them to digest the data. So they saw it. We got a great note back from their team, just really happy with everything that went through. And I think kind of what you were saying before, and just going back to some of the data here from Planters, all of this data is kind of new from the offline world. This is something that wasn't able to be measured prior to this at
Like,
all.
literally not at all.
Not at all. It was just guessing. You know, a lot of feedback, and I'm sure, Megan, you get the same thing, is like, you know, we know how many scans we get. That's it if we're using a QR, but nothing like this before.
Oh,
So, you know, it provides a whole new lens into the audience and justifying a lot of the big bucks that are being spent on things as such as the Super Bowl and All-Star games and, you know, commercials across the board.
and it's like, you know, I mean, you think about it, earlier in the call, I said, you know, the front door of our platform is the code itself. That's what everybody recognizes. They go to a game, they turn on their TV, they're gonna see the code. Everybody recognizes it. The really amazing thing is that flow codes, when compared with generic QR, about 2.5 times more likely to be scanned. And you know, Zach, we work with our partners all the time to create beautiful custom codes. So we know why, like, consumers prefer a branded experience. It's safer. These are engineered for whatever environment they're in. Like, it makes sense that a flow code is 2.5 times more likely to be scanned. But and like we were saying, it's that post scan that really is kind of what makes our platform sing. We're the only platform out here with pinpoint geo and conversion metrics. And so like, you go back to the NFL and you say you had this many scans on that NFL shop code, and then 50% of those users went on to make a purchase. And like, to that point that you were making of things that have never existed before, real-time attribution metrics for the Super Bowl. Full stop. I mean, that really is kind of where it was. We watched the code air in the office over here in the garage, our little Super Bowl war room. We watched the code air. We had metrics 2 seconds later. And that, like, when has that ever existed before? And that is absolutely wild. And it works from, like we say, that transactional side, but also, you know, the NFL can now track, like, oh, this person is watching at home and then also showing up, you know, in stadium. I remember seeing one, it was the Atlanta Hawks, maybe. It was a scan to buy tickets on a promo. And then that same user scanned the Jumbotron selfie cam code. And it's like, okay, that's end-to-end foot traffic attribution. That's user data that we never had. And it's understanding, like, well, what actually drove that fan into the stadium? And
Absolutely.
like, every activation we see here, like, this is one of the really incredible examples. It's like, it doesn't have to just stop at being on TV and being in a program or on a ticket. Like, it is a full omni-channel experience. And, you know, this one feels especially relevant given this weekend coming up.
Definitely. Yeah. And this was spun up in a matter of hours, actually. Someone on the Trailblazers team had the idea. Damian Lillard was going for breaking the franchise scoring record, and they were going to do a limited edition NFT drop. And what's the easiest way to get folks on their device downloading the NFT into their wallet is through a Flowcode, obviously, with some data and analytics to accompany it. So they came to us and we got this awesome, this is one of my favorite custom codes. I think it's just awesome on brand on their Jumbotron and in and around their concourse. All uniquely trackable. So they all have unique data patterns where you can see the engagement around the entire arena and the footprint there. But just showing you again how we can, you know, go from something to watch a roast of a peanut to claiming digital NFTs all the way out in Portland. So there's just there's nowhere you can't put a flow code and engage.
Nothing you can't measure, right? And like, that's
Exactly.
the thing that's so incredible. It's like virtually every surface, that heat map of activity, knowing what messaging works. And like, sports on TV especially are one of those spaces that we see such incredible engagement, because it's like, you know, the fan engagement is always going to be huge. This one was from I'm an alum of Nexstar Broadcasting, and this was one of our sister stations in Buffalo. And you know, it was scan to vote in this poll, and based on their Nielsen numbers, 88% of their viewing audience scanned that code. And when you look at that from a standpoint of, usually we have, you know, maybe a couple hundred Nielsen households in any given market. You're working off of a survey and some really basic data to say, we think this is how many people are actively watching you right now. Even based on that, to go back and say that you have thousands of first-party data points that all came to you directly, not through a survey, not through a third-party service, but like that engagement, capitalizing on the content, leaning into that fan aspect, making it compelling, and then measuring the response. They used this to tease further content. That's my other favorite thing, is they said, scan, vote in the poll, we'll show you the results later. It was an amazing piece of content. And we see it too, these more transactional pieces. I mean, obviously all of our sports teams, whether they're through our partners, in person, on air, whatever it is, the contesting side is always going to be a really, really big one. This one was AARP and the Mets. It was a scan to win a prize pack. And again, with this kind of idea of capitalizing on the entertainment factor, leaning into the metrics, all of this, they were able to see that they were getting 1,000 new email addresses every time they aired this 30-second spot. 90% conversion rate on that, which is, we've seen that across a lot of sports activations and a lot of TV activations too. It doesn't even matter if it's compelling, if the code is prominent, if the creative is solid, people will engage.
Absolutely. And Megan, I don't know if you're getting the same feedback that I am, but a lot of these entries and the CRM that's being collected, these are all new to database for a lot of our partners, right?
Yes.
This is a whole new target demo that they may not have had access to before, that is easily being onboarded into the system via Flowcode. So I hear that all the time, which is like, these are folks that we haven't been able to get in touch with before for whatever reason, but now we have them via Flowcode, and it's just the easiest way to create that one-to-one relationship.
And like even fringe demos, right? So like we say all the time, like, so like on the broadcast side there, there's audiences and they tend to be broken out in bands. It's like 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 54. So like it's all of these age brackets, and traditionally anybody under the age of 24 was probably not watching broadcast. Anybody over the age of 55 was probably not interacting on digital. But here's the thing, you put a flow code out there, and because everybody knows how to scan a QR code, this is the technology that literally will get anybody into that pipeline. And that's where you see it. You see that new data coming in. It's because people are inclined to take the action. If you make it easy for them, they know how to do it. And if the value prop is there, they're going to do it. This one was one of our favorites for the year. It was the Welch's Fruit Snacks giveaway. This one got, like, in 24 hours, they had 40,000 new email addresses within 24 hours of this spot going live. And it begs the question, like, why wouldn't you?
Right.
Why wouldn't you make it connected?
There's really no downside.
No. And this actually kind of reiterates that too. This is neither sports, it's not really anything related to the Super Bowl, but to kind of echo that idea of quality content, or quality traffic, quality engagement, and new traffic. This was a partner campaign that we ran with Auto Trader, and they came back to us and said, you know what? Those Flowcode scanners spent 3 times the amount of time on site as any other source in this campaign, whether it was display, whether it was social, or anything else. And it just goes to say, and 98% new people.
Yep.
It just goes to show that, like, I could go on.
It works.
That's all we gotta say. It works. That's it. That's all we gotta say. And we see it. It's just so many different calls to action. It's in sports content. It's in stadium. It's on air. It's selling things. It's just showcasing things. It's literally just surprise and delight. It's so versatile, but the ultimate factor is that it works.
Yeah. And something that I say to a lot of the partners that I work with too is, let's test it. Like, we'll fully stand by that. We'll go toe to toe with whoever, because we know just how powerful the platform is. And typically, you run a good A/B test. There's a lot you can learn using Flowcode about your partners, your consumers from A to Z. You're gonna at the end of the day have a lot more to work with.
And it's just, again, it's working with the team who at this point knows the workflows, knows the setup, can guide you through getting started, and realistically, like, built a suite of tools to make it easy. We have a video editing suite. We have a creative services team. I mean, it really is. It's just, let's just do it. Let's just We don't have too many people left on the call, but I do want to just open it up for questions in case Chris or Dan have any. We are very happy to answer them. And if not, we are always very happy to follow up directly via email too. But if you have anything that you'd like to mention, please don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Zach and I will certainly hang out for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I mean, Zach and I will just sit here and chat too. I can't believe how quickly this day went by. I don't know about you.
No. Yeah, this whole week has been flying by. I don't know if it's just because we're so busy, but
I think so.
Good to be busy.
Yes, better busy than bored, for sure. I'm not seeing any questions come in, so I think we'll probably be good to wrap here. But Zach, it's been really lovely talking to you. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Awesome, my friend. Have a great time at the wedding this weekend and enjoy that Florida weather.
Thank you very much. And everyone, keep your eyes out for NBA All-Stars. There'll be a lot of flow codes involved.
I can't wait. I can't wait. 2 big tentpole activations. How lucky are we?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome, Zach. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks. See ya.